Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into some really fascinating territory, institutional and evolutionary economics.
Yeah, specifically looking at Jeffrey Hodgson's work. We've got his book, Economia Institutional e Evolutiva Contemporanea, or parts of it anyway.
Exactly, plus some great context from Gandel Gruber and Lara, and interestingly, a look at Karl Polanyi and how his ideas might connect to Marx.
It's a good mix. Should let us get a real handle on Hodgson's critique of, well, the mainstream view and what he offers instead.
Okay, let's jump right in. Our mission today is to unpack these core ideas, institutional evolutionary eaters, see how Hodgson sets them against neoclassical economics.
And weave in those related threads from Polanyi and Marx about how economic systems actually function.
So where's the first point of friction? Where does Hodgson start to, shake things up?
Well, a huge starting point is his challenge to neoclassical economics, specifically its heavy reliance on this idea of universal rational choice.
The idea that we're all perfectly rational calculators all the time.
Pretty much. And Hodgson says, look, this misses something absolutely fundamental, the role of habits and institutions.
Right, the things we do without really thinking, the sort of ingrained routines.
Exactly. Neoclassical thinking often leaps from that rational choice assumption straight to explaining prices or market outcomes, welfare.
Okay.
But institutional economics, Hodgson argues, needs to first show how shared habits actually form, how they get embedded, and how they're reinforced by specific social institutions.
It's more grounded in the actual social fabric.
Precisely. It's about the real mechanisms.
Now, you mentioned prices. I remember reading that institutional folks are a bit wary of a single grand theory of prices. Is that right?
That's a really key point. They're skeptical. Instead, they tend to look at how prices actually get set in specific market contexts.
Like different methods depending on the industry.
Exactly. Think about industries with just a few big players, oligopolies. They might use markup pricing or administer prices or full cost pricing.
So practical strategies that evolve in specific situations.
Right. These are historically developed, institutionally specific ways of setting prices. A general theory, they'd argue, often just papers over these real-world differences.
That makes a lot of sense. It's less abstract, more about what actually happens on the ground. And didn't Hodgson point out cases where theories got dismissed because they didn't fit the rational choice mold, even if they worked?
Oh, absolutely. Duesenberry's consumption function is a classic example.
Ah, yes, influenced by Veblen, right. Social comparison?
Spot on. Duesenberry showed our spending is hugely influenced by what others around us do and our own past habits. Keeping up with the Joneses, basically.
And it matched the data pretty well.
It did. But the problem was it relied on habit and social factors, not pure forward-looking individual calculation.
So, because it didn't fit the dominant theory.
It got sidelined, not because it was empirically wrong, but because it clashed with the core assumptions about rationality. It highlighted habit, which was a direct challenge.
Okay, so if it's not all rational calculation, what does Hodgson put at the center?
Habits and rules. They're absolutely fundamental for Hodgson. He draws on people like Veblen, but also Herbert Simon.
Habits as automatic responses.
Yeah, non-reflexive self-sustaining patterns. Things we do repeatedly in similar situations without conscious thought, like your morning routine.
You just do it.
Right. And crucially, Hodgson says this isn't necessarily irrational.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. We have limited brain power, limited time, limited information. We can't possibly compute the absolute best outcome for every tiny decision. That's bounded rationality.
So habits are shortcuts, a practical way to cope.
Exactly. Relying on habits can be a perfectly sensible, rational response to complexity and our own cognitive limits.
Okay, that reframes habits significantly. And rules.
Yeah.
How do they fit with habits?
Well, even when we are trying to optimize to make the best choice, we're always operating within some framework of rules. Laws, social norms, procedures.
Right, there are always constraints or guidelines.
Yeah. But here's the tricky part, Hodgson points out. Can optimization itself explain where those rules came from?
What do you mean?
If you say we rationally choose the rules, then you have to ask, what rule did we use to make that choice?
I see. You need a rule to choose the rule.
Exactly. It leads to a potential infinite regress. You can't fully explain the reliance on rules just by invoking optimization.
So we have to accept that rules and habits are somehow more fundamental.
That's the implication, which ties back to Simon's idea of satisficing.
Satisficing. Settling for good enough.
Precisely. Because optimizing is often impossible in complex, uncertain situations, we aim for an outcome that meets a certain aspiration level, guided by these simplifying habits and rules.
And do these habits and rules just shape individual actions, or do they scale up?
Oh, they absolutely scale up. Hodgson argues they're crucial for things like learning and communication.
How so? Learning seems like it might break habits.
Well, yes, but learning itself involves forming new habits, new routines, new ways of thinking. It's often transformative, reconstructing our conceptual frameworks. Think about learning a skill.
Like riding a bike or playing piano. It becomes automatic.
Exactly, new habits. And language itself is a massive social institution built entirely on shared habits and rules grammar, vocabulary that let us communicate.
Hmm. This really pushes back against the idea of the individual as the starting point for everything, doesn't it? Which leads to methodological individualism.
Spot on. Methodological individualism is this principle that all social phenomena must ultimately be explained in terms of individuals, their actions, goals, beliefs.
And Hodgson critiques this.
He does. His argument essentially is that individuals are themselves socially determined. Our preferences, our knowledge, even how we reason, are shaped by the culture and institutions we grow up in.
So if institutions shape individuals,
Then using those individuals as the fundamental uncaused cause to explain the institutions becomes circular. You're explaining society using individuals who are already products of society.
it's a chicken and egg problem again.
It really is. You get stuck in this loop. Where does the explanation truly begin? Individuals shaping institutions or institutions shaping individuals?
Is there a way out of that loop?
Well, some theories, like the theory of dual character from Cooley or Giddens, try to say society and individuals are just two aspects of the same thing, collective versus distributive.
Two sides of one coin?
Kind of, but others, including Marx, Comte, Lewis, pushed back, arguing that historically, social structures often have priority. We are born into existing structures, languages, norms.
Marx's tradition of all dead generation.
Weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living, exactly. We inherit the institutional landscape.
So we can't just build up from individuals alone.
Right. Sperry's rule offers a kind of guideline here. It suggests we should explain individual behavior at the individual level, their intentions, limits, dispositions.
Okay.
But we should look to higher level systemic factors, institutions, social structures to explain the origin of those individual characteristics.
So explain the person by the person, but explain where the person's traits came from by looking at society.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It acknowledges both levels without getting trapped in the loop.
Okay, so that covers these institutional side habits, rules, the individual society link. What about the evolutionary part in the title?
Right, evolutionary economics. This contrasts sharply with the static equilibrium focus you often find in neoclassical thought. It's all about change, development, process over time.
And Nelson and Winter are key here.
Very key. Their book, An Evolutionary Theory of Economic Change, is foundational. They introduced core concepts like routines and search.
Routines as the firm's habits, its DNA.
That's a great analogy. The established ways a firm does things. And search is like mutation, the process of looking for, experimenting with, new ways of doing things, new routines.
Okay, so routines are stable, search introduces variation.
Exactly. And echoing Simon again, they use satisficing. Firms don't constantly search for the absolute best routine.
They only search when things aren't going well.
Generally, yes. When performance, like profits, drops below their aspiration level, then they initiate search. It's problem-driven innovation, often.
Necessity being the mother of invention.
You got it. Now, Hodgson also points to a broader stream of evolutionary thought he calls AR.
ALAR, what's that stand for?
Anti-reductionist, Lamarckian, anti-universalist, radical history. It's a mouthful.
Definitely. Who's in this group?
Thinkers like Veblen again, Commons, Hobson, even the later Hayek fits in some ways. The focus is on innovation, changing preferences, the evolution of habits and institutions over historical time.
Okay, you mentioned Lamarckian. That's the inheritance of acquired characteristics idea, right? How does that work economically?
It's an analogy, of course,
Yeah.
but the idea is that if acquired characteristics, learned skills, habits, routines can be inherited socially.
Through teaching, imitation.
Exactly. Through imitation, education, passing down practices. Then social and economic evolution has a Lamarckian flavor. It's not just random variation and selection like in pure Darwinism. Learning and adaptation can be directly transmitted.
So successful adaptations can spread more directly than just waiting for random mutations.
That's the idea. It allows for faster, more directed change, potentially. Hodgson also uses David Hull's concepts of replicators and interactors here.
Replicators and interactors.
Replicators are the things whose structure gets copied, like a specific routine or a business model. Interactors are the entities, like firms, that interact with the environment and cause differential replication.
So the firm interactor uses routines, replicators, and its success in the market environment determines if those routines get copied.
That's the essence of it. Hull emphasizes that interaction with the environment is crucial for selection.
This evolutionary perspective must really change how we think about the firm itself. Hodgson talks about competence-based theories.
Yes, exactly. This view explains why firms exist, their boundaries, their structure, based on the unique competencies they develop and hold internally.
Competencies like skills, knowledge.
Skills, yes, but especially tacit knowledge, teamwork, organizational capabilities. Things that are hard to trade on the open market. Thinkers from Smith and Marx to Knight, Penrose, Nelson, and Winter contribute here.
So the firm is a bundle of capabilities, not just a legal entity or a profit maximizer.
Right. It's defined by what it can do. This contrasts quite strongly with, say, transaction cost economics.
Ah, Williamson's idea, that firms exist to minimize the costs of making deals.
Correct. Transaction cost theory focuses on the costs of contract and negotiation, monitoring, enforcement. The competence view focuses on productive capabilities, knowledge, and learning.
Internal strengths versus external friction costs.
A good summary. And Hodgson brings in Durkheim here too, reminding us that even contracts rely on a foundation of non-contractual elements.
Like trust, shared norms.
Exactly. You can't possibly write a contract to cover every eventuality. There has to be some level of underlying trust and shared understanding for market exchange or even internal firm cooperation to work smoothly.
That seems obviously true when you think about it.
It does. Penrose's work is also key for the competence view, emphasizing dynamic learning by doing and the growth of tacit knowledge as drivers of firm expansion, which is very different from static equilibrium models.
So firms grow because they learn and get better at things.
Essentially, yes, their internal capabilities evolve. Aukian offered a slightly different evolutionary angle, arguing the market itself selects for efficient firms, almost like natural selection, regardless of whether individual firms are trying to maximize profits perfectly.
Survival of the fittest firm, even if the firms aren't perfectly rational.
Right. The market environment does the selecting. And overall, Hodgson emphasizes that organizational knowledge is often collective, embedded in routines and social structures, not just the sum of what individuals know.
Wow, okay, that's a rich picture of the firm. Now, we also have Karl Polanyi in our source material. How does his perspective fit into this landscape?
Polanyi provides a powerful historical and sociological critique of the very idea of a market economy. He saw it as a specific, historically constructed institutional arrangement.
Not something natural or inevitable.
Definitely not. He argued the market economy requires separating the economic sphere from the rest of society, driven by the motives of fear of hunger and hope of gain. And crucially, it demands the commodification of things that aren't really commodities.
You mean land, labor, and money, his fictitious commodities.
Precisely. Land is nature, labor is human activity, money is a token of exchange. They weren't produced for sale. Treating them as if they were commodities subject purely to market forces, Polanyi argued, has deeply damaging social consequences.
Because it subordinates society to the economy.
In a way, yes. He introduced the concept of embeddedness to describe how, in most human societies throughout history, economic activities were submerged or embedded within social relationships, kinship, religion, politics.
And the market economy tries to disembed the economy.
Exactly. To make it autonomous, governed only by market laws. Polanyi identified three main ways economies can be integrated or organized.
Reciprocity, redistribution, and exchange.
That's right. Reciprocity works through symmetrical social structures, like gift exchange in kin groups. Redistribution needs a central point, like a chief or state, to collect and reallocate goods. Exchange relies on price-making markets.
And the key is that the institutions come first.
Absolutely. The pattern of integration, reciprocity, redistribution, exchange, depends on the presence of specific institutional arrangements. It's not just about summing up individual behaviors.
That resonates with Hodgson's emphasis on institutions. Did Polanyi see connections to Marx?
He acknowledged Marx's insight into how liberal capitalism specifically created that separation between the political and economic spheres. That disembedding was something both thinkers saw as characteristic of the system.
Interesting. And Polanyi is famous for the double movement, right? What's that about?
The double movement is central to his analysis in The Great Transformation. It's the idea that the historical push to create a self-regulating market system, the first movement.
Laissez-faire, deregulation.
Right. That push inevitably generates a counter-movement for social protection.
People pushing back,
Yeah.
demanding regulations, welfare, labor laws.
Exactly. Society spontaneously reacts to protect itself from the destructive consequences of a completely unleashed market, especially regarding those fictitious commodities protecting labor, land, and the stability of exchange. This often involves class dynamics and political struggle.
So the market expansion creates its own resistance.
That's the core idea. There's been discussion, of course, about how close Polanyi's framework is to Marxism, given these points of overlap in critique. He certainly engaged with and respected Marx's analysis of capitalism's dynamics.
Well, this has been incredibly rich, a really deep dive, true to the name, if we had to sort of wrap up the main takeaways.
I think the big picture is that Hodgson's institutional and evolutionary economics offers a powerful, grounded alternative to neoclassical assumptions. It puts habits, rules, and evolving institutions right at the center.
It moves away from the isolated, hyper-rational individual.
Definitely. And Polanyi complements this beautifully by historicizing the market itself, showing it's an institutional construct, not a natural state, and highlighting the inherent social tensions created by trying to disem the economy completely.
And were there any particular aha moments for you revisiting this material?
For me, it's always powerful to be reminded just how much our seemingly rational economic life rests on this deep foundation of non-rational habits and social conventions.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And the clarity that markets aren't just free spaces, but are actively made and sustained by rules and institutions. Plus, Polanyi's double movement, that relentless tension between market expansion and social protection, feels incredibly relevant still.
Absolutely. So for you listening, maybe take a moment to think about how these ideas challenge conventional economic wisdom. Where do you see habits and institutions shaping your economic world, or the bigger picture?
It really prompts a final question, doesn't it? If our economies are so deeply shaped by these evolving habits and human-made institutions, what does that mean for the ideal of a purely free or perfectly rational market? Is that even achievable or desirable? And how does it change how we might think about guiding or reshaping our economic future?